All right, my friends. Hello, welcome to the Center of Love. I don't know about you, but it's been way too long since I've been here physically in your presence, and I'm really glad to be back in Canada despite the gray, misty rain. Actually, not despite, because of, I think I actually quite enjoy this weather. So it's great to see you all and great to see some new faces as well. And so for the benefit of our guests today, and also for us as a reminder, I just thought I would say a few words about the Center of Love before introducing our speaker, the topic, and the fun times ahead. So welcome. The Center of Love. On the back of our cards, it says that we are a community of like-hearted individuals who like to share wisdom, healing, and love with each other and, of course, with the world at large. How do we accomplish this very ambitious mission? Well, every second Sunday, we gather here, and somebody comes up here where I am standing currently, and they share something with the rest. You'll notice that there is no priest or deacon or minister here because every single member is a teacher and also a student. And what we do is we take turns, we alternate. So one day you're the teacher, the next time you're the student, and we all learn from each other. And what we like to share is, well, quite a few things actually. Some of us like to share stories from our own personal lives. Some of us like to talk about methods, practices, and modalities that have helped us in our lives. I can think of a few examples in recent history. We actually had Fab talk about yoga, which is a method of healing and union with oneself. We had Tara do a talk about tapping, which is another modality, another way to regulate your nervous system. In the very near future, thanks to Linda, we will have someone coming to do a breath work, not a session about breath work, but the power of breath. We will learn about the power of breath work. And so these are the types of things that we like to share with each other, things that have helped us. But what I want to touch on right now, the most important thing to keep in mind is that we are like-hearted individuals. Now, for some of you, that might be a novel concept, or maybe you've never even heard that term before. So let me elaborate just a little bit. We all come together with different needs. We're all seeking something different. Some of us are here looking for wisdom. Some of us are here looking for relief from depression or fear, isolation. Some of us are here to share our treasures. We all come here with different motives, different goals, different needs, right? And that's up here. The reason that we come together is because at some level and at some point in our lives, we have all realized that the fundamental answer to our different questions is love. It might not be the whole answer. There might be a little bit more to it than that. But what we've realized is that without love, whatever solution, whatever practice, whatever game plan we devise will ultimately fall short. Love is the unifying piece. It's the essential ingredient in all that we do. And so when I say that we are like-hearted, it means that some of us might disagree on politics, for example, which is something we try not to talk about too much to avoid unnecessary triggering. But sometimes it comes up, and we might not agree with everybody in the room on different political subjects. Last week, we had, or 2 weeks ago, I should say, we had an amazing presentation with Arno and Tracy and Amanda, and each one of them shared a unique perspective on health, the Western medical model, and alternative modalities of healing. Each story was radically different, came from a very different point of view and a different perspective, but each one had great value to offer us, even if we didn't fully agree with one or another. And so it's very important that we keep this in mind, that disagreements and sometimes even perhaps getting triggered, these are not things that should be avoided, but rather we should regard them as opportunities to learn about ourselves, to learn about others, and to grow and be together in community. So love is the answer. That's simple, pretty easy, check. And today we're actually following up because on the last episode of the Love Club, as I mentioned, we had an excellent talk about health and different aspects of health and medicine. And today's presentation is very much a continuation of that subject, although from another different perspective. And to start us off, I will quote the great Hippocrates. Perhaps you've heard of the Hippocratic Oath that doctors are supposed to take when they begin to practice medicine. Yeah, I got you. Well, Hippocrates, don't besmirch him because you have a bad impression of Western medicine. Hippocrates was on the right path because he said, "Let thy food be thy medicine." Now, my understanding is in med school, they spend about 1 day on diet and nutrition. So they did not follow our good friend Hippocrates' advice, but that's okay because there are people among us who have made the connection between nutrition and health and beyond, not just physical health, but even mental and spiritual health. And today, our topic is just that, how food can help us connect to our bodies. And of course, I imagine that extends beyond the body to other people. And so we're very lucky to have our guest speaker today, Aabha Gupta, who is a nutritionist, a certified tapping person. I don't know what the formal term for that is. EFT practitioner, there we go. Also, in addition to the credentials, a very wise and intuitive person. I have had the pleasure of hanging out with Aabha quite a bit in the last few months, and I've gotten to know her quite well. And I'm very much amazed at her ability to intuit things, both in her own body and in her own life, but also beyond. She's a very wise person.
All right. Thank you for showing up. And I'm going to share something which is, there is research around it, and a lot of it is also my own personal experience and personal experimentation with food. I have been experimenting with food for about 20 years now. More formally got into coaching and all of that for about 12 years now, but I've been experimenting with a lot of things, some of which the experiments I'm going to do with you guys today. And so the experimentation has not been just about, okay, what food is good for me, what food is not good for me. I think that is the easiest part to figure out in a lot of ways. The experimentation has been mostly about what kind of impact the food that I'm eating has on my, not just physical well-being, but emotional well-being and mental well-being. And it just so happened that the time when I was doing all this experimentation was also one of the really difficult times in my life emotionally. And I was noticing how all of this was, in some ways, a lot of it helped me actually. And one of the experiments that I did during that time was going without having any salt and sugar for about 6 years. That's not something I'm going to do with you guys today. But it was an interesting experiment. And it was, as I got back into eating salt again, not so much sugar, but salt again, I could see how it was different, how it felt different. I'm not going to label it as felt better or worse, but just felt different when I introduced salt again. So it was interesting. One of the other experiments that I also have extensively done is how the body responds to how well or not so well we chew our food. And there is actually a term for this. It's called Fletcherizing, and created by, I'm forgetting his first name, but the last name is Fletcher. And he's actually written a book on it, which is, I don't think was published, but somewhere I got hold of the PDF version of it online and I read it, and incredible research. But just how the food, how well we chew the food makes a difference in terms of the availability of the nutrients from the food, and hence how it makes a difference in our not just physical energy, but he actually tested with people who did physical exercise and how it impacted their performance. Eating food that one would think is barely enough to survive, but how their exercise performance just excelled. And I have experimented with it where it actually became a meditation. Eating became a meditation when I started experimenting with this, because I was really focused on how well I was chewing my food. And what that meant is I was counting how many times I was chewing. And at one point, I would chew every bite like up to between 60 to 80 times. And just a warning there that if any of you start doing that, be prepared for the jaw to hurt terribly for the next few days until you get used to it. It's like your jaw went to the gym. But it's quite interesting, and chewing to a point where the food is almost liquid. So that's so that at a very basic, not so basic, but it requires some cultivation. But at the most practical level, I would say that is a great way of really doing some good to the body through the food that we eat, in terms of making it most available to the body and making every bite of food that we eat count for the body. And so that is just a little bit of how I have experimented with food, and it doesn't stop, honestly. I mean, even today, I just look at food, and it's, for me, when I go to the grocery store, I say it's like taking a kid to a toy store, especially the produce section. And I'm so excited with all the colors and all of that. And it's also an experimentation lab for me. And from this love for food, I also got extensively into cooking and creating different recipes and foods that are good for us. And I think as difficult as it may sound to eat food without salt or sugar, I took up a challenge once, and to feed 127 people food that was cooked, traditional Indian meal that was cooked without salt, sugar, and oil. So the oil piece was pretty easy. The salt and sugar piece was challenging. And the outcome was, and this is what I actually increased my faith, is that if we try enough, if we choose to think outside the box, and if we choose to look at our food from a slightly different perspective, it is possible to eat in a way that is good for us. And what affirmed this for me was that all those people who ate that meal did not know that there was no salt and sugar or oil in the food. So I think that was affirming that it is possible if we choose and decide to think out the box and think and take a different take on food, basically. And so today, as we dive into this, I'm going to do my best to keep it to 10 minutes, I guess I have now. I have done hour-long talks on this topic, and I have done 7-day retreats on this very topic. So this is the shortest I'm going to speak, but I'm going to do my best to do that. And so food, as we know, and as Fab said, it has role to play in our mental, in our emotional, in our physical well-being, in our social well-being too, right? I mean, we do connect over food. People connect the best over food. When we prepare a meal together. That's one of the things I used to do actually when I was in India, getting together with friends and just cooking together, because it just brings us together in a way that nothing else can, I feel. It's a common binding place for most of us. And food is something that everyone eats, so it's easy. When we look at the mental benefits of eating the right foods, I mean, eating the right foods can bring mental clarity and focus. And when I say right, I would say healthy, and each one has their own definition, but I'm talking about the general healthy food definition for healthy foods here. And it can bring in more clarity, more focus, whereas eating foods that are not so good for us can set in brain fog. A lot of times it does actually. For example, eating a lot of sugar, right? And it'll give you a high for a little bit, and then there's going to be a crash, and then there's going to be not feeling so good, and then there's going to be the brain fog and all of that. And then you want more sugar. And it goes on and on and on. And so that is one of the things in terms of mental health. When we look at emotional health, so emotional health sometimes, not always, but sometimes can be a chicken egg story. Like we don't feel good, and so we reach out for those foods that we know we shouldn't be eating, and then we eat those foods, and then we don't feel good because we ate those foods. So it becomes a self-feeding cycle in some ways. And so that is one part of it. Another part of it is that if we actually engage in eating foods that are really good for us, we feel good at an emotional level because we feel good that we did something good for the body, but also it has an impact on our emotions because of what those foods do when they reach the gut. And they have an impact there, and it feeds the gut microbiome. And that has a direct impact on how we feel. And I don't know how many of you know this, but 90% of the serotonin that we produce is produced in our gut. So if we want to feel good, then we really want to take care of that gut. And so feeding the right foods. And there is the other side of it too. Like when we don't eat food, or when we don't eat right, when we don't eat the foods that are good for us, then besides feeling bad ourselves in our mind, the gut is inflamed. And because the gut is inflamed, the signaling from the gut to the brain is very distorted. And so again, that has an impact on the emotional health. So in some ways, it's a double whammy. It kind of. And like I said, the thing is that the right foods, and when I say right foods like that are high in good fatty acids, have a good effect on the brain. They impact the brain chemistry. And the foods that are not good for us, they impact the gut, and then they impact the brain. So there's a super highway actually between our gut and the brain, and that super highway is the vagus nerve. And that vagus nerve is constantly communicating between our brain and the gut and telling the brain what is happening in the gut, and the brain makes choices based on that, and vice versa. But there are more signals going from the gut to the brain than going from the brain to the gut. So I think that's something to think about as to who calls the shots, really. Right? It's not, we think it's the brain, but it's really the gut in a lot of ways that calls the shots. Okay. So I think what I want to get into today is, I can speak endlessly about this, but I want us to experience some of what I'm talking about, and take away whatever you can and whatever resonates with you, if all it does for you today is bring in more awareness to the food on your plate and just paying more attention to it, that's good enough. And one of the ways that, before we get into some of the practical demonstrations, one of the ways to do this actually is, and this is what I do pretty much at every meal. And when I sit with a plate of food in front of me, I look at the food visually and what is there on my plate. And there is research around this. When we look at the food and when we see what is on the plate, the brain is signaling the stomach as to what food is coming in and secreting the digestive juices for that kind of food. So that actually impacts digestion. And so that is one thing. Another thing that really helps, which I also actually advocate all my clients to do, is before we start eating, taking 3 deep breaths. And that's another way of getting into the body, because what happens is, for too many of us, we are spending a lot of time in our head. Most of the times we are in our heads and not really able to drop into the body fully. And so when we take those 3 breaths, we are kind of getting into the body, but there's something else that is happening at that time, which is that those deep breaths, really deep breaths, they kind of push on the vagus nerve. And that activates the vagus nerve. And that activates our parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest and digest system. So it kind of activates the process of digestion. So that is a very powerful thing to do. In fact, I still have my food journal. I think it is from 2008, when I first attended my formal, some kind of training in food and nutrition. And one of the journal that we were supposed to keep was what we ate, how we felt when we ate it, how we felt 2 hours after, how we felt, I think it was 5 hours later, or no, not 5 hours later. I don't remember the next. But then it was also how I slept that night and how I woke up the next morning. Because it's not just in that moment that the food is affecting us. It's affecting us for the rest of the time. I wouldn't say it is in the body, because it keeps affecting us even after that, because it has done certain things in the body that are going to keep impacting us. Are you with me so far?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I thought I went too far into okay. So that, I think, is a helpful tool, another way to tune into our bodies, depending and really checking in with the body, how the body is feeling after we have eaten certain foods. Another thing is to look at our cravings and seeing what kind of foods we crave for when we are in a certain mood. And sometimes salty cravings or lack of minerals, but also in my case, I think salty foods are also comfort foods for me. And so when I'm not feeling so good, then I crave towards salty foods. And I think it has a lot to do with associations in childhood and all that stuff. Sweet foods or carbs, craving for carbs is craving for energy. But again, there is an emotional association there. In fact, in one of the EFT sessions, this is very interesting. And one of the EFT sessions, I was working with a client and we were working on her addiction for chips. And we kept tapping and tapping and tapping and tapping. And into the session, she realized that she would reach out for chips every time she missed her mom, because her mom gave her chips when she was younger, and there was some kind of association there with chips. So every time she missed her mom, she reached out for chips. So even having that awareness, this is more emotional awareness. It's awareness regardless. And so I think having that awareness of when I'm reaching for certain kinds of foods, what am I feeling? How am I feeling? What is the need that I'm trying to meet through this food? Because a lot of times when we are reaching for certain foods, there are certain emotional needs that we are actually trying to meet. And so what is the need that I'm actually trying to meet by reaching out for this food? So yeah, I think that was a big thing for me. Like, wow, who would have thought? I mean, otherwise we end up labeling, oh, I'm bad, I just can't control myself, I end up eating this food, and then it's bad, more, I would say, damage done instead of good when that awareness is not there. So connecting with the body, if I were to sum it up, is more like creating mindfulness, or it's cultivating mindfulness. And that mindfulness helps us. And if it is easier to cultivate that mindfulness with food, then that mindfulness really helps us to drop into our body and really understand what is going in this body and how this food is making us feel as we consume the food. Okay, so that is, I think I didn't speak for a long time, but I think that's a lot to unpack in terms of actual application and experimenting with it. When you go back and really take each aspect of this and try to unpack it as it pertains to your life and how it unfolds in your day-to-day experience. I think that's a lot of homework. So bearing that in mind, especially when we are eating meals that are high in fat, and then we don't end up eating too much of it, because in the moment we want more, the brain is asking for more, and later on it leaves us feeling not so good because we ate so much of it in that moment, not recognizing that this was a craving that was coming from the brain, not really the hunger of the body. And that brings us to the next point, which is, again, something that we spoke about earlier, is whether it is the physical hunger or is the emotional hunger. And really tuning into the body to see, am I physically hungry? Is my body really needing food? Or is my mind saying that my body needs food? And so tuning into hunger. And when I say that, I think it's also important, and Fab knows this, I have fallen into this trap of getting hangry when I don't recognize I'm hungry till it gets to a point where I'm too hungry. And then it's like, well, I won't throw tantrums, but my face definitely changes. And so I think that is something that people don't, when we are not tuned into the body, we don't recognize the hunger enough. And then until it gets too far. And then we don't know what it is anymore. We just want food and not feeling good and not happy and all of that. But so just tuning into the body and recognizing how a food is making us feel. It's again coming down to mindfulness and creating that awareness in our body with relation to food. How it makes us feel, how it leaves us feeling after and the next day. I mean, I know even now that when I don't eat well a certain day, the next day I can immediately tell that, okay, I didn't do good yesterday. And when I say didn't do good, it's not that I ate something that was not really good for me. Even not eating enough leaves me feeling not so great the next day. It's not necessary that I ate the wrong foods, but I just didn't eat enough. And the next day I'm like, not doing good. Or too much. Yeah, well, too much is not usually a problem for me because it's a cultivation, right? I mean, it's just, I think in my case, I have in some ways trained the body to a point where if I eat too fast, I start choking and I get hiccups right away if I eat too fast. So that's just my body's cue saying that you're eating too fast and you need to slow down. That's it. So it's pretty much, there are times when I am in a hurry and I'm saying, so now it's just like, okay, if I don't have enough time to eat, I'll eat half of what I'm supposed to eat, but I may as well eat it in a way that I enjoy it and my body can really use it. Yeah.
But for the rest of us, overeating is a problem. For some of us, I won't speak for everyone, but I have not trained my body to behave this way. Yeah. I mean, you get nuts. I wish I'm getting hiccups, yeah. Nice. That's awesome.
Okay, so that sums it all, what I have to say, and I am open to any conversations we want to have around this.
Yeah.